My father thought I was a failure and refused to pay for my education, but a homeless genius gave me the key to becoming a millionaire. I grew up in a house where my name never echoed as proudly as my brother's. Ethan, my twin, was a golden boy, the hometown hero, football captain, MVP, the guy everyone clapped for at pep rallies. Me? I was the kid sitting in the back, typing away on my beat-up laptop, teaching myself how to code because nothing fascinated me more than what could be built with pure logic and a little creativity. But to my father, football was real. Code was imaginary. He didn't get it. None of them did. My mom tried to act like she didn't play favorites, but even she lit up more when Ethan walked into the room. My dad, he didn't even try to hide it. Football puts food on the table. That tech junk you mess with, it's just a hobby. That was the general sentiment. I'd asked once if they'd help me pay for an actual coding course. They barely let me finish the sentence before laughing it off. Not worth the money, Adam. You already waste enough time on that screen. But money for Ethan? A whole different story. It became crystal clear when senior year rolled around. Graduation was coming up, and the talk of college was in full swing. Ethan had already been accepted to a big-name university on a partial football scholarship. My dad was over the moon. I had decent options, too. My grades were better, my SAT scores miles ahead of Ethan's, and I had a real shot at making something of myself. But none of that mattered. One night, over dinner, my dad made the announcement, loud and proud. Your mother and I had decided to put all our savings toward Ethan's education. He's got a future in football. We're investing in that. I almost choked on my mashed potatoes. Ethan, meanwhile, leaned back like a king about to inherit his kingdom. My mom, she suddenly found her peas very interesting. So, what about me? I finally asked, putting my fork down because, well, suddenly I wasn't hungry. Dad scoffed. What about you? I clenched my jaw. College isn't free. You'll figure something out, he said, waving a hand like I was a mild inconvenience. You're smart, right? Smart kids don't need handouts. Handouts. That's what he called it. Not an investment. Not a show of faith. A handout. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms folded. You can just, I dunno, get a job. You spend so much time on your computer. Maybe you can make money off of it. Dad laughed. Yeah, maybe he'll invent some app and make $1 million. Then you can thank me for making you tough it out. Yeah, and maybe Ethan will actually pass his English class without the teacher accidentally losing his assignments. I muttered under my breath. My mom gasped. Ethan threw a roll at me, and Dad looked like he was about to ground me. But what was the point? I was already done. I should have seen it coming. Honestly, I don't even know why I expected anything different. Maybe because I want to believe that deep down, they'd actually see me as more than just the other son. But this was a whole new level of rejection. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the glow of my laptop screen, scrolling through stories of people who'd made it big from nothing. Guys who started coding in their parents' basements. People who bootstrapped their way into Silicon Valley with nothing but determination and a Wi-Fi connection. Those were my people. Not the jocks, not the legacy students who had their parents paying their way, but the ones who built something from the ground up. I wanted that. No, I needed that. So I did what any rational person would do in my position. I packed my stuff. Clothes, laptop, the few books I actually cared about. I even grabbed my favorite coffee mug because, hey, I needed at least one familiar thing in the unknown. And for dramatic effect, I made sure to slam my door on the way out. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. I wasn't dumb. I knew leaving like this wasn't some grand Hollywood moment where I'd storm out and become a billionaire overnight. I had no job, no savings, no backup plan. But I had one thing, the certainty that I'd prove them wrong. One way or another, I was going to make it. I was halfway out the door when Ethan called after me. You're really doing this, huh? I didn't answer, and he just smirked. See you when you fail. I'd say the same, but you got Dad's wallet to keep you afloat. I shot back. He scowled, but I didn't stick around to enjoy it. I stepped outside into the cold night air. No turning back now. And when I did make it, they'd regret ever betting against me. The bus ride to Los Angeles was long, uncomfortable, and smelled like stale French fries and regret. Not exactly the grand arrival I'd imagined when I stormed out my parents' house. But hey, reality has a way of humbling you fast. My wallet was light, real light. I had enough to last me maybe 5 days if I stretched it. And by stretched, I mean living on gas station hot dogs and those tiny bags of chips they call snack size, but are really just an insult to hunger. The first order of business was finding somewhere to crash that wouldn't get me mugged or worse. I ended up in one of those budget hostels where the bunk beds creak if you breathe too hard, and the Wi-Fi is more a suggestion than a feature. My roommate was a guy named Dale who claimed he was just in between ventures, but mostly watched conspiracy theory videos at full volume. The bathroom situation? Let's just say I learned real quick to shower at off hours, unless I want to experience a horror movie in real time. Welcome to the dream, right? I needed a job. Fast. I wasn't naive enough to think an entry-level coding position would just fall into my lap, but I figured, hey, I've got skills. I can code circles around most people my age. Someone out there has to recognize that, right? Wrong. Turns out, tech companies don't care if you've been building projects on your own since middle school. What they do care about: fancy degrees, connections, and glowing recommendations from people with last names that sound like trust funds. I fired off resume after resume, trying to sound professional, but my inbox remained a graveyard of auto-rejections. Reality check number 2. Talent means nothing without a foot in the door. And I had no connections, no referrals, and no golden last name. With my money dwindling, I had to get real creative real fast. That's how I found myself delivering food on a beat-up rental bike, weaving through LA traffic like I had a death wish. The job was simple. Pick up, drop off. Don't get hit by a Tesla. The pay? Just enough to keep me afloat if I survived long enough to collect it. At first, I tried to juggle job hunting and delivery work at the same time, applying to tech jobs in between dropping off overpriced sushi to influencers who barely looked up from their phones. But soon, exhaustion started winning. Long shifts, barely any sleep, and the crushing weight of rejection emails that all started to sound the same. Thank you for your application. While we were impressed with your experience, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Sure, other candidates. The ones whose dads played golf with the CEO. One time, I actually saw a job listing that basically described me perfectly. Self-taught developer with a strong passion for problem solving, experience in multiple programming languages, and a drive to innovate. I applied. A week later, I got a rejection email saying they were looking for a more experienced candidate. I checked LinkedIn later. The guy they hired? A 22-year-old who had spent 2 summers interning at the same company. His uncle's company. Go figure. One day, I had a delivery at an upscale tech firm downtown. The kind of place with glass walls, in-office espresso machines, and people in Patagonia vests discussing burn rates, and equity stakes like they weren't just making it all up as they went along. I stood there in my worn-out sneakers, holding a bag of salads with quinoa and whatever else rich people pretend to like, staring at the sleek office beyond the reception desk. That was supposed to be me in there, not outside, not holding someone's lunch, but inside, building things, solving problems, living the dream instead of delivering to it. It hit me hard. I'd spent years picturing my future in a place like this, and now I was closer to the janitorial staff than the engineers. That night, back at the hostel, I cracked open my laptop and forced myself to focus. If no one would hire me, I'd make myself so good they wouldn't have a choice. I started grinding harder than ever. Online tutorials, open source projects, anything that would level me up. I watched success stories on YouTube of people who had gone from broke to software millionaires. I clung to those stories like a lifeline. If they could do it, I could, too. One night, I was coding at the tiny desk in the hostel's common area when I felt something skitter across my hand. I looked down. A cockroach, not even a little one. This thing had been through battles. I stared at it. It stared back. Well, I muttered, at least someone in this room is interested in my JavaScript tutorial. Dale snorted from his bunk. Man, if that thing learns the code before you land a job, I'm going to be real disappointed. At least I wasn't the only one with a dark sense of humor about this mess. But let's be real. I was running out of time, out of money, and out of options. I needed a breakthrough before reality broke me first. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. The rain hit Los Angeles like it had a personal vendetta. I hadn't seen a proper downpour since I got here, but tonight, the sky finally decided to unload everything it had. The streets, usually buzzing with influencers taking selfies in front of neon signs, were now nearly empty. Just me, a couple of desperate Uber drivers, an occasional rat making a break for a dry spot. I was making my own break too, straight for the only shelter I could find. A bridge near downtown, the kind of place most people don't even glance at unless they're actively trying to avoid eye contact with whoever might be lurking underneath. But at that moment, it was either get soaked or take my chances under there. Easy choice. I ducked under the bridge, shaking off the water like some stray dog. My hoodie was doing exactly nothing to keep me dry, and my sneakers might as well have been sponges. Then I heard it, a low chuckle from somewhere in the shadows. You picked a great night for a stroll, kid. I stiffened. That wasn't the kind of voice you ignored. Rough, but with a strange sort of warmth, like someone who'd seen too much but still found things amusing. I squinted into the darkness and saw him, a man sitting against a pillar, wrapped in a worn-out trench coat, covering most of his face. Didn't exactly have a choice, I said, glancing down at my soaked sneakers. Figured I'd get out of the rain before my socks turned into an ecosystem. He chuckled again, shaking his head. Smart move. Not many use their heads these days. I didn't know what was about the guy, but he didn't give off the usual, this dude might stab me vibe. He looked sharp, like someone who used to be somebody. You live here? I asked. He smirked. Define live. Fair enough. I sat down on the driest patch of concrete I could find and pulled out what little food I had left, a sad, half-eaten sandwich from earlier. The guy didn't ask for anything, but I tore off half and handed it over. He hesitated for half a second before taking it with a nod. You don't look like you belong under a bridge, he said between bites. Neither do you. His eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe touche. We ate in silence for a minute before he finally spoke again. What's your story? I sighed. Cliff Notes version? Tried to make something of myself. Got shut down at every turn. No money, no connections. Just talent that apparently doesn't count for much. He snorted. Let me guess. You're in tech. That got my attention. How'd you? He held up a hand. Your fingers. People who work with code have a certain way they move. And you got that look. Frustration mixed with stubbornness. I studied him for a second. You know a lot about tech for someone living under a bridge. That made him laugh, really laugh, like I just told the greatest joke of all time. When he finally calmed down, he leaned back against the pillar and sighed. Used to be one of the best. Worked on systems most people don't even know exist. Then things went sideways. I raised an eyebrow. Sideways how? He hesitated, then looked me dead in the eye. Let's just say, when a massive data leak happens, someone's got to take the fall. Didn't matter that I wasn't the one who did it. Someone needed to be the scapegoat, and I was the easiest target. I sat with that for a moment. So they ruin your life for something you didn't even do? He smirked. Welcome to the real world, kid. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. This guy wasn't just some ex-employee who got fired. He was deep in something. And yet, here he was, sitting under a bridge, eating half of my pathetic sandwich like none of it mattered anymore. I don't know what came over me, but I blurted out, You ever think about getting back in the game? He gave me a look. You think they'd let me? Maybe not to the front door, I said. But what if we built something of our own? That made him pause. What do you mean? I shifted closer, lowering my voice. I've been busting my back trying to get a break in tech, but no one cares. It's all about who you know. But you've got knowledge most people can't even touch. What if we put that together? He studied me for a long moment. And do what exactly? That was the million-dollar question. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. I leaned in. Let's figure out together. The rain kept falling, but suddenly, the night didn't feel so cold anymore. He smirked, wiping his hands on his coat. You really think two broke guys under a bridge are going to change a game? I shrugged. You got something better to do? That made him laugh again, this time shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I've seen worse ideas, he muttered. Hell, I've been part of worse ideas. I grinned. Then let's make this one count. We sat there, the rain still hammering down. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in this mess. The city might have chewed us up and spit us out, but we weren't done yet, not even close. Hanging out under a bridge wasn't exactly what I pictured when I thought about my future. But here we were. Rains came and went. The city never slept, and somehow I had an ex-government level cyber genius as my new best friend. Not exactly the networking move I expected to make in LA, but life's funny that way. Richard, yeah, turns out he had a name, was unlike anyone I'd ever met. The guy spoke in algorithms, thought in encryption, and somehow remembered the exact hexadecimal address of a server he worked on a decade ago, but couldn't remember the last time he ate. The man was a walking paradox. And for some insane reason, I trusted him. It started small. Late-night conversations, him tossing out concepts and theories that went so far over my head, I'd need a telescope to see them. But the more he talked, the more I listened. And the more I listened, the more I realized something. This guy wasn't just some washed-up has-been. He still had it. The sharpness, the brilliance, buried under layers of bad luck and worse decisions. Sure, but it was still there. And he made me see something, too. If no one was going to give me a break in tech, I'd make my own. One night, over the saddest dinner imaginable, half a gas station sandwich and a questionable banana, we started throwing around ideas. Not pipe dreams, real tangible things we could build. Richard had seen the ugly side of cybersecurity. The gaps, the flaws, the vulnerabilities that companies pretended didn't exist. And I knew firsthand how impossible it was for small businesses to afford decent cyber protection. One well-placed attack, and a mom-and-pop shop could lose everything overnight. So we had an idea, a cybersecurity tool built for the little guys. Simple, affordable, effective. Something that could level the playing field. There was just one problem. We had zero money, no equipment, and our office was still, under a bridge. You ever try coding on a library computer? It's like performing surgery with a plastic spoon. Public libraries became our makeshift office. Free Wi-Fi, outdated PCs, and just enough privacy to not get kicked out immediately. When the libraries closed, we got creative. Some co-working spaces had free trial nights. And let me tell you, we became real good at looking like startup founders scoping out new office space. If anyone asked, we were still in the ideation phase. Sounded better than hacking together code on borrowed time. Food was another problem. I was stretching my delivery job paychecks thinner than my cheap thrift store hoodie. I'd bring Richard whatever leftovers I could spare, but that man had the metabolism of a black hole. He could eat a full meal and look like he hadn't had food in days. I don't get it, I said once, handing him half a burrito. How are you still this skinny? You burn calories encrypting data? He took the burrito like it was the Holy Grail. Brain power consumes a lot of energy, kid. Pretty sure my brain works too, and I'm still a solid 15 pounds heavier than I was in high school. Metabolism's a scam, he muttered through a mouthful of rice and beans. There was just one tiny complication, Richard's history. Turns out, when the government thinks you leak classified info, they don't just forget about it. He wasn't exactly on the FBI's Christmas card list. That meant keeping a low profile. No LinkedIn, no company registration, no anything that could lead back to him. Anytime we access something outside a library computer, we had to be careful. It also meant there were certain places we avoided, government buildings, high-security networks, anything that could trigger a flag. Fun fact, When a man who used to work in cybersecurity tells you to steer clear of certain networks, you listen. One time, while I was scrolling job listings, I saw a cybersecurity internship position at a big-name company. I half-jokingly showed it to Richard. "You should apply," I said. "Bet they'd love to hear your insights." He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Yeah, let me just waltz right into the company that blacklisted me. That'll go great. Hey, you could wear a fake mustache. I'm already in hiding. Kid, I don't need to look like I run a magic shop." Fair point. One night, while we were working on a borrowed laptop in a 24-hour diner, after ordering the cheapest thing on the menu, so we didn't get kicked out, Richard got this look in his eyes. That mad scientist just figured something out. "Look, back in the day," he said, lowering his voice, "I built something. A scan. Faster than anything they had back then. It could rip through vulnerabilities in seconds." I nearly dropped my coffee. "And you just remembered this now?" He shrugged. Didn't seem relevant until now. Relevant? The guy had been sitting on a potential gold mine. If we could refine it, we wouldn't just have a cybersecurity tool. We'd have the cybersecurity tool. Something that could detect weaknesses before an attack even happened. It was the kind of game changer that could put us on the map. The only problem? Technically, it wasn't supposed to exist. And using it? Yeah, that might be bending a few rules. But at this point, bending the rules was pretty much our business plan. "You sure this thing works?" I asked. Richard smirked. "It worked before, just gotta tweak a little." "How little?" "Couple weeks. Maybe a month." "A month? We're running this operation on borrowed Wi-Fi and diner refills. We don't have a month." He thought for a second. "We do if we're smart about it." And that's when it hit me. We didn't just need to build the tool. We needed to prove it worked. And the only way to do that was to use it. Richard leaned back, grinning. "I like the way you think." That was the moment everything changed. We weren't just two guys with a half-baked idea anymore. We were two guys with a half-baked idea and an illegal, potentially game-changing cybersecurity tool. What could possibly go wrong? A month under a bridge, coding on borrowed Wi-Fi, and surviving mostly on questionable diner coffee and free library snacks. But against all odds, we had done it. The first working version of our cybersecurity tool was alive. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, and that was all that mattered. Richard and I had spent weeks tweaking it, testing it, breaking it, and putting it back together. The thing was fast, faster than anything we had seen before. It could scan for vulnerabilities in seconds and patch them before attackers even had a chance to think about breaking in. We were so excited about it, we did something stupid. We put up a demo online. In hindsight, maybe not the best move for two guys who were technically still living off stolen diner Wi-Fi. But at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. We wanted proof that our idea worked, that we weren't just two nobodies screaming into the void. And somehow, somebody actually noticed. Hashtag the call that changed everything. It started with an email. Not one of those spammy, "Congrats, you won a free cruise" emails, but an actual business inquiry. A guy named Harold Winters wanted to talk. Now, I had no idea who Harold Winters was, but the way Richard's face darkened when I told him made me pause. "You know him?" I asked. Richard leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Yeah. Everyone in security knows Harold Winters. And he's not the kind of guy you want noticing you." Great. Just what I wanted to hear. Despite Richard's paranoia, I agreed to meet Harold. Not in person. Because let's be real, we weren't about to just walk into a billionaire's office like we belonged there, but over a video call, using a borrowed laptop in a quiet corner of a co-working space. Harold Winters looked exactly like you'd expect a tech tycoon to look. Sharp suit, sleek office. The kind of smile that says, "I could buy your entire existence, and it wouldn't even dent my portfolio." But his pitch? It was gold. He loved what we had built. Said it was a kind of disruptive tech that could shake up the cybersecurity world. And he wanted in. Office space. Brand new equipment. Legal support. All funded by him. No strings attached. Except, the usual investor stuff. A percentage of the company, a seat at the table. Small price to pay for turning two bridge dwellers into legitimate business owners, right? I was ready to sign that deal before he even finished talking. Richard, on the other hand, looked like he was mentally mapping out all the emergency exits. The second the call ended, Richard turned to me. We can't trust him. Why not? The guy's offering us a way out. An actual office. Real money. You want to keep coding on library computers forever? Richard exhaled sharply, like he was debating whether or not to tell me something. Finally, he leaned in. Winters doesn't just invest in security companies. He collects them. And when he gets what he wants, people disappear. I frowned. Disappear how? Not like vanish off the planet disappear, Richard clarified. More like suddenly their tech isn't theirs anymore, and they're locked out of their own companies disappear. I sat back, letting that sink in. Did it sound shady? Absolutely. But did it sound like the kind of risk that came with trying to make it big? Also yes. Richard, of all people, should have understood that. We had nothing. No money, no leverage, no way to take this thing to the next level unless someone backed us. We have to take the shot, I said. This is our one chance to stop living like we're one bad day away from losing everything. Richard didn't like it. Not one bit. But he also knew I was right. 2 days later, we walked into an actual office for the first time in months. Winters had set us up in a startup incubator. Modern furniture, high-speed internet, espresso machines that probably cost more than my entire childhood home. And best of all, new laptops. Top of the line. I nearly cried. It was like stepping into a different universe. One where we weren't nobody scraping by, but actual professionals with an actual product. Winters welcomed us personally, grinning like a king surveying his latest acquisition. This is just the beginning, gentlemen. With my resources and your tech, we're going to change the world. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But Richard still wasn't smiling. And something about that made me nervous. A week in, things were running smoother than I ever thought possible. We had funding. A small team was being assembled. And our software, it was getting better by the day. Then Winters dropped the bomb. I need you to make a few modifications, he said one afternoon, sliding a document across the table. Nothing major, just some back-end tweaks for enterprise clients. Richard picked up the document, scanned it, and his face went pale. I grabbed it from him and started reading. The modifications weren't just tweaks. They were tracking capabilities, silent, undetectable, built-in surveillance baked right into the core of our system. Winters wasn't just backing us to protect businesses. He wanted to spy on them. Richard clenched his jaw. This is why you invested, isn't it? Winters didn't even pretend to be surprised by the accusation. He just smiled. Welcome to the real world, gentlemen. And just like that, I realized we had walked straight into a trap. That night, I sat in my new office, my actual office, with a door and everything, staring at my laptop screen. I wanted to pretend like I hadn't just seen what I saw, that maybe there was a way to tweak the code, so it wasn't, a full-on surveillance tool. But Richard wasn't letting it go. He paced the office like a caged animal. You know we can't go through with this, right? I ran a hand down my face. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice, he shot back. We either go along with this and become part of whatever shady operation Winters is running, or we walk. Walk where? I snapped. Back to the bridge? The libraries? You want to go back to hacking on diner Wi-Fi? Richard didn't answer right away. He just looked at me. And for the first time since I met him, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. And that scared me more than anything else. Because if a guy like Richard was afraid, then maybe, just maybe, we were in way deeper than I thought. Success hit faster than we ever expected. 1 minute, we were two nobodies hacking away on borrowed Wi-Fi, and the next, our cybersecurity service was blowing up. Small businesses were lining up to use it, local coffee shops, independent retailers, even some international clients who somehow stumbled across our demo. Turns out, people really liked the idea of not having their entire business wiped out by a 17-year-old hacker with too much free time. Money started rolling in. not billionaire level, but enough that we didn't have to live off discount ramen anymore. I actually had a paycheck with my name on it. A real one. It was surreal. Everything was going perfectly. And then, of course, Winters decided to ruin it. At first, it was subtle. A few casual conversations. Hey, we should think about expanding the product, or big clients need more features. Stuff investors say when they're trying to push things in a certain direction. But then the suggestions got specific. Winters said one afternoon, lounging in his glass-walled office, it wouldn't be the worst idea to include some back-end tracking features. Just for analytics, of course. Nothing invasive. Richard and I exchanged looks. We both knew what he was really saying. Analytics wasn't analytics. It was surveillance. I tried to play it cool. That's not really what we built this for. Winters smiled. Oh, I know, but think bigger. Imagine how much value we could add if we could offer businesses insight into customer behavior, buying patterns, competitor strategies. All anonymous, of course. Richard's hand curled into a fist under the table. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. I tried to defuse the situation. We're focused on security. That's why people trust us. Winters leaned in, still smiling, but there was an edge to it now. Trust is a currency, Adam. And right now, I own the bank. The meeting ended, but the problem didn't. Richard was fuming. I was trying to think logically. If we said no, Winters had all the leverage. He controlled the funding, the office, even the legal framework we operated under. If he wanted to, he could pull the plug and leave us right back where we started, homeless, broke, with nothing but an idea we no longer had the rights to. If we said yes, we'd be selling out everything we built. And if Richard's past taught me anything, it was that once you go down that road, there's no coming back. I needed time to think. We barely got it. A few days later, we got a visit, not from Winters, but from two men in suits who didn't bother with introductions. They didn't need to. The moment Richard saw them, his face went white. Feds. One of them looked at Richard like they'd been waiting a long time for this moment. Richard Hayes, you're in need to come with us. Winter's secretary appeared almost instantly, flashing a polished smile. Mr. Winters would like to speak with you first. Richard and I shared a look. We didn't have a choice. We followed her into Winters' office, where he was already waiting, completely at ease, like he knew this was coming. Gentlemen, he said, gesturing for us to sit. It seems Richard has a past that's finally caught up with him. Richard didn't move. You set this up. Winters gave a small, amused shrug. Set up is such an ugly phrase. I prefer a contingency plan. I clenched my fists. What do you want? His smile didn't waver. Simple. Let me take full control of the company. Your product. Everything. In return, Richard's problem goes away. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Winters had just played his checkmate move, and we were trapped. After the meeting, Richard and I sat in silence at our shared workspace. The sleek office that once felt like a dream now felt like a cage. Richard finally broke the silence. You know, if we sign that contract, we're done, right? I nodded. And if we don't, you're done. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He played us. Yeah. I stared at my laptop screen, trying to think of a way out. There had to be something. A loophole, an escape hatch, anything. Richard tapped his fingers on the desk. We need to move first. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He's not just going to sit back and wait for us to sign. He's already making moves. We need to make ours. And what do you suggest? Running. Richard smirked. Not running. Outsmarting. He leaned in, eyes gleaming with something I hadn't seen in a long time. A plan. Sitting in that sleek office, staring at the contract Winters had thrown in front of us, I realized something terrifying. On paper, we had everything we wanted. Money, stability, an actual company with real clients. But in reality, we were prisoners. If we signed that contract, Richard would be safe from the feds, and I'd get to keep my shiny new job title. But we'd be selling out everything, our integrity, our freedom, and, honestly, our souls. Richard didn't have to say anything. I could see it in his face. He wasn't going to let Winters turn us into puppets. The problem was, neither of us had a clue how to get out of this alive. We had to move fast. Richard, being the paranoid genius that he was, had been working on a secret backdoor, a kill switch that could lock Winters out of everything if we ever needed an emergency escape plan. The problem? It wasn't finished yet, and Winters wasn't exactly the patient type. For the next few days, Richard buried himself in code, patching together the one tool that could save us. Meanwhile, I did my best to keep up appearances, sitting in meetings, pretending like everything was fine, all while secretly trying not to lose my mind. Then Winters made his move. I was barely through my first cup of coffee that morning when Winters called me into his office. The guy always had a way of making me feel like a kid being summoned to principal's office. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you and Richard are up to," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "And unless you both start cooperating, things are going to get very unpleasant." I hesitated before picking it up. Inside were documents, emails, and financial records, none of them real, but they looked real enough. If this stuff got out, it would look like Richard and I had been committing fraud for months. Winters leaned back in his chair, looking disgustingly pleased with himself. "The way I see it, you have two options. Sign over the company and walk away with a fat paycheck. Or refuse, and, well, let's just say the authorities would love to see these documents." I clenched my fists on the table. He wasn't just trying to take our company. He was trying to ruin us. And if we didn't act fast, he was going to win. That night, while Richard was working on the kill switch, I got a call I never expected. My brother, Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him in months. The last time we saw each other, he was still my dad's golden boy, and I was the screw-up who left home with nothing. But his voice on the other end of the line sounded different. "Hey," he said, "look, I know I haven't exactly been the best brother." I raised an eyebrow. "Wow, understatement of the year." He sighed. "I deserve that. Listen, things haven't been great. I tore my ACL. Football's done for me." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Dad's furious. It's like the moment I wasn't the star player anymore, I stopped existing." I let that sink in. It wasn't like I want to be the guy who said, "I told you so," but I told him so. After a long silence, he finally asked, "How about you? You making it out there?" I exhaled. "Not exactly." And before I could stop myself, I told him everything. Winters, the blackmail, the fact that Richard and I were about to lose everything. Ethan didn't say anything for a second. Then he swore under his breath. "That guy sounds like a complete scumbag. No arguments here." There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. "Look, I think I can help. I know a guy. His parents run a law firm in the city. The kind of firm that takes down people like Winters. That got my attention. Ethan had spent his whole life with connections I never had, and now he was offering to use them for me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like we might actually have a chance. The next morning, I met with Ethan's contact, an older guy named Martin Caldwell, who looked like he'd spent his entire life making rich men regret their bad decisions. He listened as I laid everything out, nodding slowly before finally leaning back in his chair. "You have proof?" he asked. I glanced at Richard. He smirked. "Give me 24 hours. Caldwell nodded. "Then we have a case." Winters thought he had us cornered. He had no idea what was coming. Back at the office, Richard worked like a man possessed. His fingers flew over the keyboard, muttering to himself like he was casting some kind of digital spell. I kept watch, making sure no one walked in on us. "You know," I said, leaning against the desk, "I never thought I'd see the day my brother actually did something useful for me." Richard didn't even look up. "Guess miracles happen." "Hey, I'll take it. Just make sure this kill switch of yours actually works." "It'll work," he muttered. "The real question is, can you keep your poker face when we confront Winters?" That was a fair question, because if we slipped up, this whole plan was going to blow up in our faces. The night before the big presentation, I barely slept. Richard didn't either. But that was normal for him. He had the entire plan mapped out, every line of code triple-checked, every possible failure point accounted for. We weren't just launching a product. We were detonating a bomb right in the middle of Harold Winter's empire. And we only had one shot to get it right. The venue was packed. Investors, tech journalists, executives from companies that wouldn't even answer my emails a few months ago. They were all here to see what we had built. The next big thing in cybersecurity. Winters was in the front row, all smiles and handshakes, acting like he owned the place. In a way, he did. At least, he thought he did. Richard nudged me as we stepped on stage. You ready? Nope, but let's do it anyway. I walked up to the podium, took a deep breath, and started the demo. The first part went exactly as planned. I introduced our software, explained its features, showed off some impressive live demonstrations. The audience loved it. Applause, nods of approval, the whole deal. Then came the moment of truth. Before we wrap up, I said, pulling up a new screen, there's one last thing we need to address. Richard activated the kill switch from his laptop in the back. Instantly, a hidden dashboard popped up on the main screen, one that was never meant to be public. The audience murmured. Some people leaned forward. Winter sat up straighter. This, I continued, is the unauthorized tracking system that was being built into our product. Gasps. A few people exchanged confused looks. I zoomed in on the code. It was designed to collect data without user consent. It could monitor businesses, track competitors, and, worst of all, sell that data to the highest bidder. Someone from the audience shouted, "Who put that in there?" I turned to the front row, straight at Winters, our lead investor. Every camera in the room turned to him. He tried to play it cool, chuckling, shaking his head like it was all some big misunderstanding. But then Richard hit the second phase of the kill switch. A real-time log appeared, listing off secret transactions, internal emails, backdoor deals. Everything Winters had been doing behind the scenes. The room erupted. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Some of the investors in the audience looked like they had just been hit by a train. Winters shot up from his chair, storming toward the stage. "This is ridiculous. This is slander. You!" I cut him off with a calm smile. "We know you're upset, Mr. Winters. But don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to defend yourself. Right after we finalize the contracts you wanted us to sign. You know, the ones making this company officially ours." His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no moves left. Security was already moving toward him before he could finish whatever excuse he was scrambling to come up with. We had him, and he knew it. By the end of the day, Winters was trending for all the wrong reasons. Investigations were opening. Stockholders were pulling out, and his reputation was imploding in real time. Meanwhile, our company, bigger than ever. Investors who had been hesitant before were now eager to buy in. The legal team Ethan had hooked us up with cleared Richard's name, wiping away years of false accusations. For the first time in a long time, he was a free man. And we weren't just two guys hacking away in a basement anymore. We were running a real business. A week later, I got a call from my dad. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he meant to dial Ethan and hit the wrong number. But when I answered, he hesitated for a second before saying, "I saw the news." I waited. "You built something real," he admitted. I didn't know. That was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. And for once, I didn't feel the need to rub it in. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm not angry anymore." That was enough. With the company stable and our future secured, Richard and I decided it was time to give back. We started a new program, one that provided coding education and mentorship to kids who, like us, had been counted out before they even had a chance. We built training centers in struggling communities. We hired mentors who knew what it was like to fight for an opportunity. We gave people the tools to build their own future. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Not the money, not the revenge, but proving that even the ones everyone else wrote off could rise higher than anyone ever expected. And we weren't done yet.